Good? All right. So we'll get started. Make a little akdama before we're going to start teaching Reb Tzodok. Whoever hasn't heard about Reb Tzodok, he was born a couple of hundred years back, about 200 years ago. He lived for about 80 years. He started off his life in a household that was not defined as Chasidic, right? It was a misnagdish, sort of. I don't know how much there was in a snagdish, but they didn't really accept the derech of the Baal Shem Tov. However, at the age of, I think it was 25, he met with the Ishbitzer Rebbe, the Baal Mea Shiloach, and that completely changed his life. And he started devoting himself to a different type of avodas Hashem. These svarim that he wrote, one of them we're going to start now, called Tzedek, are a result of that shift in how he perceived the world, how he perceived the Torah, and how he perceived Judaism and religion in general. So we're going to start off, he starts off this Sefer in a very deep level. We're going to start maybe in a very deep place in the ocean where most people are not comfortable swimming, and maybe we're going to come back a little bit over time and try to explain these ideas in a way that we can relate to them, so we can start from the shore and walk in. But in the beginning, we're just going to plunge in. Okay? He starts with the Gemara in Erevin. It's on the first daf in Erevin where it says, Ashkechon Mishkan de Ikre Migdosh. And he says, Hu inyan l'shem yichid kitchebrichi shchinte. This is the concept of combining kitchebrichi, which we relate to as God, the divine presence, and maybe later we'll talk about the terminology. Today we don't really have the terminology to describe these concepts appropriately. The differences between the names of God, like Kael or Elikim or Havaya, or in this instance we're going to talk about the Shechina. So all these, we can call them different aspects of the divine. The word God, the way that it's used in the secular world, doesn't really apply to Judaism at all. In fact, Judaism doesn't have a word for that, for God. God doesn't exist in Judaism in the sense that people are used to. And the reason for that is because when we relate to life, we're not relating to life in a philosophical format. It's not an intellectual exercise. We use the intellect to define what's happening, but the actual experience is not an intellectual experience. The word God is an intellectual word. The word God describes an entity that has never been seen or understood or come in close contact with, and therefore it's an intellectual word that doesn't have a specific meaning. In Judaism, we try to relate it to concepts that we can actually incorporate into our experience, and the Shem Havaya and the Shem Elikim and the Shem Kael, they all have different forces within ourselves that we can relate to, that these words are trying to give rise to, they're trying to develop inside of us, so that we can have some kind of a ability to maneuver inside the nefesh, inside the person, and to cause shifts in consciousness, shifts in understanding and how we relate to life. That's the ultimate goal. So this is why before every mitzvah where we say L'shem Yichud Kitchebrichi Shchintei, this means that we're taking two different parts of our experience, two different perceptions within the mind of a human being, and somehow we're unifying these aspects of reality and saying, even though these aspects might seem different in our experience, we know that at their very essence it's all one and the same, and they're all flowing, all of life is flowing from the same core, from the same purpose, from the same reality that it's trying to manifest. All of life, all the different particles, all the different structures and systems that create life, they all flow from one specific purpose. And this is at the very essence of what we believe. This is based on the pasuk Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. where we actually use these terms, Hashem and Elokeinu, to also to unite these two. And to have a deeper understanding of that, here he's talking about a term called Kitchabrichi.
Say it's male, female, no?
There is male and female. Kitchabrichi Shchinta is clearly male and female, correct. But beyond male and female, there are different distinctions of the energies that we're talking about, what they really mean in our lives. How did they manifest within us? How can we relate to these things? And obviously, when we are exploring these things, we're trying to go back to a wisdom that was established close to 6,000 years ago and was then given over for a few millennia before it actually became the Torah, the way that we know it, with the full text that we have. And then it's further extrapolated into more detail. And we have today, we have obviously books and books and books without an unlimited amount of information that all relates back to this wisdom that comes back to the 22 letters and the 10 nekudos and the 32 taimim that create the language of Judaism. Now, there's a lot of things that got lost over this period of time. A few thousand years is a long time for human consciousness, specifically when we're talking about language. Language for each individual is different. We all have slightly different definitions of different words, even on the physical plane. But once we go to the spiritual plane, which is internal, our language becomes even more differentiated, each person basically living in their own universe. And the reason why we're so fractured is because we don't have access to Lashon HaKodesh the way that it was spoken thousands of years ago. Lashon HaKodesh was a pure language in which reality was explained or quantified in a very specific way, in a way that doesn't allow for mistake, it doesn't allow for misunderstanding or misinterpretation. Even though after the other languages became developed and after thousands of years of civilization creating their own structure on top of nature, which doesn't really correlate to nature, so now we have a virtual reality made of words, which is based on Greek philosophy, and it doesn't really correlate to the type of language that we're dealing with that came pre-Greek philosophy at the time the Torah was given, closer to the ancient wisdoms of Egypt and the countries, Mesopotamia, the ones that were closer to the beginning of speech, where speech started to convert from symbolism into letters and words, which gave rise to the ability of creating a virtual reality, of creating a society that has different functions in life that have nothing to do with nature, like the entire economy, the way that we have it now, and the different structures of government that are holding up society. These are all man-made structures. They lack the natural depth and the natural coexistence that exists within everything within nature. So nature has 4 levels of existence, the way that we know it, the doimam, tzameach, chayin, medaber. And all these correlate in a certain way, where, for example, a tzameach is also a doimem, and a chai is also a tzameach and a doimem, and a medaber is also a chai, and also tzameach, and also a doimem. Meaning a person who is alive, he has all the levels below included in him. So when we say he's alive and he's a medaber, we're not saying that when we're saying he's a medaber, we're not saying that he's not an animal. He is an animal that speaks. We're not saying that he's not a plant, because the body is a plant-based organ that grows with food that's put into there and the water that we have to give to our bodies to allow it to grow the way that it does. So our nervous system is very much, has many similarities to an actual tzameach, to a growth that grows from the earth. But beyond that, the spiritual realm, the medaber, which is where we live, which is where we think, the spirit listening to me right now is the chelek ha-medaber, that's converting the sounds that I'm making into words and meaning. That function, that part of us, has infinite depth. It has the ability to perceive life in all the ways that life has been perceived, from the beginning of time until today. It's all there, what we call bekoyach, in potential. And as we live and as we come into contact in life with all kinds of different energies and forces, so that koyach, that potential, which we call a nefesh, comes out and manifests into actions and words and ideas and concepts. And for each person that's different, for each society that's different, for each generation that's different. And that has a tremendous potential of manifestation. And this is where Judaism really tries to dig in, tries to understand what is the potential of this being, of this medaber, beyond just survival, beyond its ability to configure tremendous systems to keep itself alive and to arrange for food and to arrange for comfort and to arrange for air conditioning and other stuff that make the human comfortable. What is the potential of the koach hadibur? What is the potential of the nefesh to manifest? And how do we give rise to that force within the nefesh that'll make it manifest, that'll make it come out and show itself to us in a way that is different than what we're used to, in a way that is not restricted to the logic of the Greek philosophy, of the Western cultures, and the way that we're used to perceiving life. So there are many things in language that we're going to have to go back to dig up, sort of, and understand how they saw life before we can really relate to how the Torah is trying to teach us and how the Torah is trying to guide us in the way of understanding who we are and what we are and why we are here. So one basic word, which people are very familiar with, but most people don't understand, is the third word in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim. So the word Elokim, today, Elokim, God, right? But when we say Elokim is God, we've taken away all meaning from it. Because like we said before, God has no meaning. God is beyond meaning. God is the one that made all this be. Now, according to the Zohar, God, the elusive, the one that made all this come into existence, is not accessible to the human mind or to the human experience. Not just us, not just to people that are not that spiritually advanced, but even the most advanced spiritual seekers, which would include the Nevi'im, they did not have access to the elusive. Because the elusive is beyond perception. It is life that cannot be perceived. As soon as there's consciousness, we've already been removed from the elusive, we've been removed from the source of life. Source of life is beyond consciousness, it's the source of consciousness. So when we talk about the names of God, we're not talking about God in his eternal essence. We're talking about the properties of God, the wisdoms of God that we can have access to so that we can live our lives and fulfill our potential. So when we're talking about God, essentially, we're first and foremost talking about reality. The way we know there's a God is simply by knowing that there's a me and there's a you. You don't need anything more than that to know there's a God. Now you say, how do you know somebody did this? We don't need to know that. We know that whatever is has a system and has a wisdom of how it works. And that's enough for us to allow us to pursue that wisdom and to dig in and find out what this experience is all about so that we can understand that the one who made all this had this potential in mind for us. How do we know? Because this is what he created. So we know the creator from creation. We don't know him through a philosophical argument. We don't know him because we think life is so logical and therefore if it's not logical it doesn't exist. In fact, nothing in life is really logical. Our birth is not logical, our death is not logical, and nothing that happens in between is logical. Logic is a great tool which relates to the midah of bina, where you can travel once you have specific facts in order, once you know certain things about life. Logic will give you the ability of being Mevin davar mitoch davar, so you can take two truths, two realities, and bring out a child from them, and bring out a conclusion, a logical conclusion. However, logic does not work in a vacuum. So today in Western society, we're used to thinking logically about life, but the place we're coming from, the givens that we're using as a basis for our opinions and our understandings are completely false. And therefore, logic just builds a virtual reality around false assumptions. And that's not a way, really, of interpreting life or understanding life. So when we want to come back to the Torah, we're trying to establish what are the forces that are creating my experience and how do they work. So the word Elokim, which is Gematria Teva, refers to the structures within nature, the structures within reality, the forces within our very own being that are creating whatever it is that God created. And they continuously do so. So Bereshis Bara Elokim didn't stop 6,000 years ago or whenever it happened. Bereshis Bara Elokim is a continuous experience of the forces of nature creating reality. And this happens continuously, non-stop. If it stops for one moment and the forces of nature say, now I want to take a rest, then everything we know disappears. And this is not only outside of us. This is most importantly inside of us, because the spiritual reality is obviously at the base of the Jewish religion. It's the base of any religion. And understanding what the spirit is, how it works, and how it manifests, that's ultimately what brings a person to a higher level of consciousness and allows him to really be the being that was created by nature, and not an imagined being that was created through a random philosophy that he came across in a book or somewhere. So when we think about Bereshis Bara Elokim, we need to realize the continuous significance of that statement, that whatever is happening right now, whatever brought you into existence, whatever brought your parents into existence, and whatever brings your conclusions about life into existence, these are all forces of nature that, according to our tradition, need to be understood. You need to have a relationship with them, preferably a good one, otherwise they'll punish you. And once you start understanding how this really works, and you start going deeper inside and getting to know that being, which has been you the entire time, but you haven't noticed, then you're starting to make a spiritual connection with your neshama. Now, one of the basic misunderstandings we have about spirituality is also the concept of spirituality itself. What is spirituality? And for most people, spirituality is something vague that's not really definable. It's something you do for God. So now we've thrown that into the unknown domain too, because if we don't understand God, how are we going to understand spirituality? How are we going to know how to go about it? And it could turn into very easily into a guessing game of what am I supposed to do first? How do I know which one's right, which one's wrong? And if I can't do everything right, what should I drop first? And this is all because we don't have a deep understanding of what it is we're dealing with. It's not real to us. It's not true. It's just conceptual. It's intellectual. And in an intellectual world, in a virtual reality, everything could be more important than everything else, and there's really no way of defining it. However, in our reality, where we are, there is two sides of the same coin, which we call a human being. And the two sides of that coin is the physical side, which we refer to as the body, which can be perceived by the five senses, and the spiritual side, which we refer to as the soul. As the nefesh, the ruach, the neshama, the chaya, the yechida. These are all different names for the same being. They just have different names for it. As it evolves and it becomes more self-conscious, it gets a new name. So what is that? What is the nefesh? Right? How do you define a nefesh? So the closest thing we can have to understanding a nefesh is understanding the language that the nefesh speaks. And what is the language that the nefesh speaks? The nefesh speaks in thought. So every moment that we're listening to something, or we're contemplating something, or we're just awake, conscious, aware, something, right, a spiritual being that we know is there because he's talking right now, but we cannot see, that logic, that intelligence, that being is our spiritual side. So in all of life, we're going through life on two dimensions constantly. And when I say dimensions, I mean families of dimensions. The physical, you're physically doing things. The spiritual, you're spiritually thinking things. You're spiritually experiencing emotions. You're spiritually coming to philosophical conclusions. All these are spiritual activities. And then we have a tool that can come from one world into the other and can change worlds. And that's the koach hadibur, the ability to speak. Speech can dress spiritual concepts, spiritual terms, like we're doing now as we're talking, or speech can also address physical concepts, physical terms. You can talk about your body, you can talk about your business, you can talk about products and things that you can feel, you can touch, anything that goes under the domain of the senses. And we all know the 5 senses, which is vision, sound, smell, taste, and touch, which permeates the entire body. All these senses give you access to the physical world. The senses of the spiritual world are all within your mind, within your brain. And your brain has many different areas and many different abilities and many different functions. All these functions are spiritual functions. And your brain is doing that and allowing you to perceive your spiritual being. Now, this seems fairly simple, fairly straightforward, right? And if things were that clear and that easy, then evil wouldn't exist. So when we actually look at life and we try to understand the process that's causing us the human experience, we'll notice that there's a level of misunderstanding going on within our own brains, within our own minds, within our own experience. There's a level of confusion, a level of misunderstanding that is constantly causing us to get into areas that are uncomfortable for ourselves. And obviously none of us have any interest to feel uncomfortable. So if we're feeling uncomfortable, it's because something outside of us or something beyond us, something we don't fully understand, is causing us to feel a certain way. And this is where the Torah comes in. The Torah is here to heal people, to give chaim, to give life through wisdom. Because the Torah's claim is that if you understand how these forces work, if you understand the spiritual forces and you understand how they interact to create your experience, you will be able to improve the process so that your spirit can freely express itself to you. And it will take out the guessing work that is involved in our spiritual balance. And the guesswork is simply because the language that we speak is not a spiritual language. So when we have certain feelings, certain emotions, certain things that are happening outside of us, which have tremendous leverage on us, and they make us feel threatened or they make us feel inferior, these forces, these energies, really don't have power over the human psyche. Right? The human psyche is its own master. It can decide whatever it wants, and it can conclude whatever it wants through the power of words. However, given the fact that we grow up amongst other people and a lot of preconceived notions are put into our minds before we even become fully conscious, so then all these different energies, all these different flows, all these different habits, all these different ways of thinking and interpreting life start becoming obstacles in our way of understanding who we are and what we are, to the extent that most people, if they look at their lives, they're going to say, life isn't fulfilling its promise to me. Life is not really giving me what I'd expect life to give. And obviously life only gives what life is supposed to give. Life has a wisdom and has a way, and it hasn't changed ever. We've been evolving, life hasn't. The spiritual world is fixed. The spiritual world never moves. It only moves within the human experience. But the concepts, the principles of how life works remain the same. 1 + 1 is 2. Wherever you go on the map, even if you fly to the moon, the principles remain constant, but the experience changes. And the experience changes based on language, based on the words we use to understand them, and based on the flow that comes to us from our spirit, and its mood, and its feelings, and its emotions, and that causes our interpretation of what's happening around us. So Reb Tzodok here is starting to talk to us about this concept of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina. And he's going to try to describe to us on a very basic level how this unification takes place. What are these forces that we're talking about? What's being united and how are they being united? So he says, Be'ira HaPoshit, K'ma she'omer beresh perek Eitzad Mevarchin, Ovev HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'imay Knesset Yisrael. Ve'ini Knesset Yisrael yo'em im mekor ha'shoresh asher misham ispashtes Yisrael. So he's saying there is a portion of reality, there's a portion of our nature that has been invested within us. This is what drives us. This is what gives us the ability to feel, to experience, to be aware, to be conscious. There's something alive within us right? That life, that intelligence that knows itself and has the ability to make decisions and actually come into existence and manifest through words and actions, that life force is called the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah resides within all of us. However, within most of us, and maybe today we can say within all of us, the Shekhinah is in Golus. What does it mean the Shekhinah is in Golus? How can a spiritual concept be in Golus? A spiritual concept is in Golus when it's misunderstood. So if you don't understand the life force within you and you're frustrating it, then the life force is captured within you and it's in Golus. And it wants to get out, which means it wants to be understood. It wants to know itself in a way where it can actually manifest its deepest desires without having to run into obstacles. And these obstacles are the misunderstandings where you think something should be a certain way and it's not. So if you try to manifest in that direction, that thing which is not real is going to become a problem for you. The ultimate place where we actually face reality is the day we leave the world. And that is why, as we live, we become more and more conscious and we try to delve deeper and deeper into knowing who it is we are beyond the body, so that when we leave the body, we're in a comfortable place. We're in a place that we understand. We're in a place that's familiar to us somewhat, even though obviously the whole background changes and many realizations come in at that time, which we can't be ready for necessarily. However, there is a certain understanding that we can have about how life happens and how it manifests, so that we don't regret later not living life in accordance with these principles. So that's the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is the part of God, Keviyochel, right? Even though the word's not appropriate. It's the part of the divine, it's the part of life, it's the part of Elohim, of the natural forces, that is giving us life. And this portion of life is not unique to us, right? Life is within the animals, life is within the tzemach, within the trees, and even the inanimate objects, even the elements have life in them. They have energy that make them be the way that they are with all the different properties that they have. However, when we talk about a person connecting spiritually, when we're talking about a person's life, we're not talking about the physical life. Life, like we said, there's life on many different levels. What the medaber, what we have as an advantage over all the other forms of life, is that we have the intelligence, we have the awareness, and we have the language to become aware, so that there can be an isgalus of what it means to be alive. And that's real life. That's why the Torah is called Torah's Chaim. It's not Torah's Chaim necessarily because it makes you physically live, even though there's a concept of the Torah creating, the whole world being created based on the Torah, and therefore it gives you life physically in that sense. But the Torah that you learn is the Torah that wakes up that part of you that can be self-aware and can understand itself, and that part of you becomes alive through Torah. And that's why we have this statement that says, Rishon b'chayim kru meisim, that evil people, even though they're alive, they're called dead. Why are they dead? Because they're not conscious. So they're alive the way that a monkey might be alive, but they're not alive the way that a human being is alive, where they're self-conscious and they realize what's really in their best interest and how to go about life in order to make that happen. So the concept of Shekhinah is all of life that is manifest. All of life that is manifest, all of life that we can relate to, in an immediate sense, relates to Shekhinah. It's manifested the divine energy. V'yodia, and now he's going to get into that concept a little more deeply. Chelek Hashem Amoy, right? We, the nation of Hashem, we're part of Him, and He's part of us. Shenafshis Yisrael em Chelek Elokah. The nefashis of Klal Yisrael, they have a divine portion. They have the ability to create, to co-create with God, right? There's different things that Chazal say that if you do them, you become a shituf l'maaseh bereishis, you become a partner with God to creating the universe, to creating life. And it says, K'mo shenemar, vayipar ba'apov, man denofach mitoich nofach. He blew into his nostrils. One who blows from himself, meaning that the life within us, the life force within us, is a divine life. Now, if you believe in the Greek concept of God, in a philosophical God, this idea is not logical. It doesn't work. Because God can either be one, or it can be multiple, or he can be, or he will be. And you're never going to get out of all these different philosophical questions that might arise from this statement. However, like we said before, these teachings come before Greek philosophy. They come before our structured minds and the way that we think, and they're very difficult for us to contemplate because we're so used to thinking of life in a certain way. However, if we ever want to understand what it is these people were writing thousands of years ago, we don't have a choice but to start relating to reality the way that they did, and not to relate to reality the way that our mind is used to relating to it. That's actually the barrier between us and reality. If we only think within a certain philosophy, within a certain logic, within a certain way, we can miss the entire point of life. So we have to really dig deeply into our most basic concepts of life and who we are and what we are, things that maybe we understood when we were very young. And we have to rewrite all those files so that we can understand them as an adult, because obviously these were concepts and wisdoms that people devoted their lives to. 100 years, a couple of 100 years, people before the Mabul, you had people who lived for hundreds of years, for 900 years. And this nature, this wisdom is so deep that they would never have a dull moment. But we've been disconnected from all this, and in order for us to connect back to this wisdom, we have to be able to leave our perceptions of what's real and what's not real, and how our life really works, and what this being inside of us is really capable of. And we have to start looking at life with an open mind to see what is it really that is happening within us. Because one thing that we all know about consciousness, and maybe not everybody's aware of it, but intrinsically we know, is that being inside of you, he is whatever you believe he is. And he will act accordingly, because you have a tremendous say about what he is and what he does. And therefore, when your mind decides that it is a certain way, then lo and behold, it is that way. And that's the power of Emunah. Now, there's different people who have the Greek philosophical mind, they want to see proof. So they say, well, if belief creates everything, why don't you prove to me that you can change something physical? And although we do have a tradition that the prophets could do that, and we have a tradition that even Tzadikim a few hundred years ago were capable of doing that, that is not a spiritual pursuit. By its very nature, that's a physical pursuit. That's a person who hasn't left the interpretation of life that he received from his five senses. His mind, his intellect, hasn't yet noticed that there's somebody inside of him that is not his five senses. There's somebody inside of him that can do math. There's somebody inside of him that can give meaning to words. And that being is the one we're concerned with. So if you can change that being, you're a spiritual miracle worker, even if you can't change anything outside of you. That's irrelevant. Because what we know from our tradition is that as soon as your body is done, as soon as your spirit leaves the body, and it removes itself from it, whatever your five senses picked up while you're going through life are not relevant. The only relevant part is, how did it affect the being inside of you? So everything we do, everything we think, everything we speak, gets recorded within our being. And that's what we take with us to the next day, to the next week, to the next year. This defines us. This creates our character. It creates our personality. So as we go through life, we're learning more and more about ourselves, but this learning is not a learning that is external. This learning is us. It defines us, and once we leave the body, it defines us for eternity. Because this was our chance to sing. This was our solo. We sang for as long as we sang, and then we're done. Then we reflect back and realize what really happened and how it really affected the people around us and the rest of society and the rest of the universe, because every action has reactions that continue to eternity. So the spiritual, like we're talking about now when we're referring to the Shechina, is the hisgalus, the understanding of what reality really is. And that's called hisgalus HaShechina, or Ashras HaShechina, or on a lower level, if somebody gets access to just certain parts of reality and he doesn't understand the full reality, it's called Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh is when a person can perceive what's real and what's not real. He can differentiate because the part in his nefesh that is responsible for that intelligence has woken up. Until that happens, the person is perceiving reality, but his responses to reality are pre-recorded. They don't really have that much meaning. They're not as deep. For a person to really understand how he makes conclusions about life, he really has to observe himself for a very long time and to start noticing what are the patterns of his mind and what's causing him the trouble. How does he get himself into areas that are uncomfortable? And if he identifies the mind patterns properly, he can basically shift to a different reality where he doesn't have those limitations anymore. So all this is about working with the Shechina. I will give my Shechina, I will rest within you. Ani Hashem HaShochen Itam. I am Hashem who rests within man, who rests within Klal Yisrael. So we're talking about Hu Chelek Elokah Mamish HaShochen B'kerev Kloyes V'lev Nafshis Yisrael. So we're talking about the divine spark that rests within the kidneys and the heart of the Nafshis Yisrael. Now, the reason he mentions kidneys here is this is also something that was known very, very widely thousands of years ago. And today, we've gotten so externalized, we've gotten so chitzoniistic that we have no idea what's going on inside of our bodies and how that affects consciousness. But from the Sefer Yetzira, everything that's inside your body is affecting how you think and feel. And that includes, obviously, the most important organs in the body for decision making, which is the moyach, the lev, and the koved. The moyach is the brain, the lev is the heart, and the koved is the liver. These three are the main decision makers in the body. The moyach is the place where the neshama rests. And the neshama, when we talk about the neshama, we're talking about your spiritual portion. What is a spiritual portion? A spiritual portion is an intelligence that allows you to make decisions based on the criteria that you're receiving. So every neshama receives data all the time through the five senses and through its own thoughts. The conclusion that you make after you get all that input, that's you, that's unique to you. And that has to do with your neshama. It has to do with your perspective, your way of seeing, your way of understanding life. However, you're not getting a clean flow from your neshama, you're not getting a clean flow from that intelligence. That intelligence is filtering through your midos, right? Your emotions, meaning if you're in a bad mood, you're going to come to a different conclusion than if you're in a good mood with the same information. And it's also filtering through your beliefs, because like we said before, you are in charge of who you think you are. And that's a belief. And when you think you are a certain way, even your neshama cannot override that. It can make you feel extremely uncomfortable so that you notice that something is wrong, but it cannot tell you, hey, what you're thinking there is wrong. Because it doesn't have the language, it has a language barrier. You believe that that can be. So any thought that might come from your unconscious telling you a message of that nature will be filtered out even before you notice it. Your consciousness will not notice it. And that is why beliefs are so powerful and so dangerous. And everything that was done with humanity from the moment that humanity became conscious until this day was by working with beliefs and understandings. Now, beliefs are not necessarily true or not true, but beliefs are concepts, usually built from words, that you accept as true. And once you accept them as true, they will filter whatever it is you experience, and they will not allow you access to reality anymore. Once you have a belief, it's going to be like a gader, it's going to be a gate, and it's not going to let you see reality. So, basic example, in the past, right, people observed that if you plant seeds, if you plant whatever it is, it's going to grow. It doesn't grow immediately, it grows a time later. Now, if a person's never seen this in action, it's up to his belief, right? If he believes enough in what he was told, then he will plant. If he doesn't believe, he's never going to plant. And guess what? If he's never going to plant, it's never going to grow, and he's never going to change his belief. And that happens to us on a daily basis in many, many different areas in our life where we lock ourselves out from different possibilities because of our beliefs. And the most important area where this affects us is in our beliefs in the spiritual and how we believe who created this world, why did he create it, is he a friend or an enemy, what does he really want, why are things so difficult in this world, why are people suffering, why are the hospitals so full. All these questions, right, cause people to have certain beliefs. These beliefs are going to dictate their experience in life. And as events happen, they might change their beliefs, but events will never tell you to believe anything. Events are there for interpretation. The interpretation is done by something beyond our beliefs, which is our intelligence, and below our beliefs, which is our emotions, our midas, and how we interact with life. So it's very important for a person that's trying to grow spiritually, the first thing he needs to realize is that we really know nothing about what it means to be a human being. We really know nothing about how this life works, how we ourselves work, why we do the things we do, what can we do differently, what are the possible experiences that you can have with this machine we call a body. All these different things are beyond our ability to comprehend while we're at this level that we are at. Only after we leave many, many beliefs that have been ingrained in us from a very young age, and we really understand what those people were trying to tell us from hundreds and thousands of years ago, only then do these ideas come to life. These areas of our brain that are necessary to be able to understand these concepts start developing, and then we can have more access to the spiritual domain to understand how the moichin, which is the mind, and the midos, which is the emotions, cause our thoughts to be what they are, and then from the thoughts it bounces further and it causes our speech and our action. And this is the entire manifestation process of a human life, which is happening constantly, this moment. Every thought, every meaning you give to my words is unique to you and only you. I have no idea what is going on in your mind right now, even though in my mind I have a certain concept I'm trying to transmit. In your mind, you have your neshama interpreting those sounds into whatever it is it means to you, hopefully something useful. And that is going to enrich your future life, your future manifestations, because you're going to be more aware of what's happening and realizing that what's happening is not necessarily what needs to continue happening, but you have a tremendous amount of control over what's going on, even beyond your thought, but only through understanding the spiritual, understanding how life works, understanding who you really are, so that you can manifest intentionally and not unconsciously. So, the kavod is the liver. So we started with the moach. The moach is the neshama, and the neshama is the intelligence. After the intelligence, there's the lev. The lev is the heart, and the heart is in charge of the emotions. And the basic primary emotions are love, which is considered to be to the right of the spiritual realm, and fear, which is considered to be at the left. These are the two emotions that drive all of life. A good society is mostly fueled by love, to the right, and an evil society or a difficult society to live in is mostly fueled by fear. These types of fuels, these two fuels, are driving the entire world. Everybody is bringing home money, or bringing home goods, or bringing home whatever it is they need to bring home by using these two primary animations of life, right? The body is just a fixed entity, a physical entity that has no interest in moving. And these two, the emotions, which are spiritual in nature, and when the person starts feeling and experiencing an emotion, it animates the body to manifest action, because it now wants to do something or wants to remove itself from somewhere, whether it's love or fear, and therefore the emotions will give fuel to the body and cause it to work. However, love is a positive emotion that gives life, gives good fuel to the body, and the body appreciates it and feels better and more comfortable, more secure after a transaction that's based on love. And fear is the opposite. Fear is a force that takes life, that makes you feel uncomfortable, makes you feel insecure, and therefore it's a force that should be used as a last resort. Meaning, if love can make things function, then we'll use some fear. But the primary goal of a civilization The primary goal of a society, the primary goal of a community, is to have enough wisdom to be able to configure a flow of life that is motivated by love. And that all relates to the heart. And the heart, when there's too much fear, it can go a little haywire. And Chaz v'sholom, if it's too much of that, people's hearts give out also. So the heart is the one that tells you if you are okay with life or you're resisting life. And that's something that relates to the heart. The liver, the koved, is where the nefesh hatzemachas, we spoke before about the growing, the living, and the speaking. So the growing lives in the koved. The koved is the head of your tree, which is your body. It's the head of making sure that the body grows, and all the actions, according to the Zohar, get filtered through the koved. Because the koved has a very strong relationship with the blood, and the blood flows into the brain to allow us to think what we're thinking and to imagine what we're imagining, and that fuels the physical portion of our body. And that's why the koved, which relates to tzomeach, relates to the actual physical being, the body. And the first letters, the Rosh Tevis of the three organs we just described, is melech, moyach, lev, and koved, because this melech is in charge of you. It basically decides everything that you've done until today was decided by these three organs, and continuously what you're going to do going forward. However, you can gain control over this melech, you can become this melech, or you can be dominated by it. And this is what Shlomo HaMelech refers to in Mishlei when he says, Tachas sholosh rog za'oretz, because of three things. The earth is angry, and we know earth always refers to the body. Three reasons why the body would be uncomfortable, would be not in a good situation. And one of them is Evet ki yimloch, when a slave becomes a master. Meaning that the consciousness inside that being is not in charge. There are other forces, there are habits, there are misunderstandings, there are other things that are going on that are causing a manifestation that is uncomfortable to the resident of that being, to the actual melech that is supposed to be on top. If we want to look deeper at these three, so we would say that the koved, and now we're going to look a little bit more at the spiritual aspect of these three. The koved represents the nefesh. The nefesh, when we call it nefesh, right? So like we said before, the spiritual being is one being. You can't slice it up. But we can relate to it from different aspects, like we do with the ultimate reality. We can relate to our very own spirit from different aspects, and we're going to talk about mostly the level of awareness within that being. So at the lowest level, the koved is the level of nefesh, and that awareness we all have. We're not fully conscious about it, but we have the awareness, which is that we feel wherever there's blood in our body, we feel conscious. We feel awareness within our fingers, within our legs. And this is a function of the blood. This is a function that relates to the liver, where the nefesh rests. And if a person were to stop the blood from any of his body parts, so soon enough he won't feel that body part anymore. The nefesh will not have access to the body part because the circulation of the blood is no longer going into that area, so his nefesh has been disconnected from that body part. The ruach, which lives in the lev, is the basis of the word ruchanius. Ruchnius, spirituality, in Judaism is actually called ruach, which we can call spirit or even air, physical air. Because the reality is that within the physical air that we breathe in, our mind has the ability to project an hallucination, which we call thought, at the top of our brain. And this ability, this projection lives within spirit. It lives within a ruach, actual physical oxygen that we breathe in, goes into our lungs, gets transferred into our blood, and where the heart pumps it up into the brain. And then we get a fresh ruach, a fresh ability to hallucinate, right? The ability to think. If that procedure, if that process of delivering oxygen to the brain is stopped for just a few minutes, the human being is out of commission because he doesn't have the ability to be conscious any longer. And that's because his blood does not contain fresh oxygen, and he's already red and imprinted everything he had to imprint on the oxygen that already exists in his blood, and it's time for a fresh dose, which he doesn't have. So his connection to life is through ruach. And this is why in the time of Chazal, and even before that, in the time of the Torah, ruach is a very used word. It's a word that's constantly, it's very misunderstood, but it's a word that's used in the Torah many, many times. I would say that it's actually advised, if somebody has the time, to look up the different places in the Torah where the word ruach is used and try to understand how what that experience was of the ruach. So besides just having the basic differentiation between ruchos rois, which means bad spirits, and ruchos toivos, but there's something called ruach Hashem, there's something called ruach HaKodesh, there's something called, there's different ruach, like there's a passage that says, v'ruach lavshes amusai. So some people say this on Motzei Shabbos, that there's a ruach that dressed him, or by Shimshon it says, heichel ruach Hashem lepamoy, that his heart started beating with the ruach Hashem. There's a new heartbeat in him through the ruach of God, through the ruach of the divine that woke within him, and he started living on a different level, a different consciousness, and it motivated him to do different things. So that's the level of ruach. This ruach takes its intelligence, takes its ability to differentiate and to be aware and to make decisions from the neshama. The neshama is the intelligence within us that is a divine intelligence. Meaning, if we vibrate at the level of neshama, when we look at life, we think of life the same way that the Creator thought of life, and therefore whatever we think is right. And this is the level that Nevi'im had access to, where they could go up into the level of neshama. And the neshama is powered, the intelligence of the neshama is powered by something called the neshama li-neshama, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or sometimes it's called chaya, the level of life, undifferentiated life, just pure life without any conditions. I'm like this, I'm like that, I'm this one, I'm that one. I just am. I'm alive. That's the level of chaya. And the level of yechida is even beyond that. There's no I. There's just pure consciousness, pure being. I can't relate to it really because I don't understand how it works, but we know it's there. So when a person goes through the levels of rising within his own being and understanding who he is, eventually he realizes that he is an integral part to everything else. There's really no separation. There's no different reality. The difference that we feel is simply in our minds, because we recorded words that make us feel different, because we were given an identity that make us feel separate. And this is because the people talking to us when we were young were talking to us out of a base of Greek philosophy, of misunderstanding life, and therefore they made us feel a certain way about ourselves, which is actually very unhealthy according to our tradition. So this is the different levels, and this is obviously the neshama relates to the moyach, where the intelligence lives. And so this is the level of melech. If you look at the other end of the words of moyach, lev, and koved, you'll find chabad, which is chochma, bina, and das. So moyach, the ches from the moyach creates the chochma, which is in the mind, and the beis from lev creates the bina, which is in the heart, and the dalet from koved is the das, which is where both of them come together to create the actual consciousness, the understanding of life that we have on a daily basis.
What is the kleos?
What's that?
The kleos.
Oh, so the kloyos are mentioned in the Torah as kloyos yoatzos. Kloyos give advice. And the reason they're called yoatzos, that they give advice, is because everything in our body functions based on our thoughts. And there are different ways of proving this. Obviously, people get sick through stress and through fatigue, so that's an easy way of proving it. People also get excited. People have different physiological changes based on their mindset. And I think that's easily observed. So within that bodily spiritual language, the kloyos, which physically clean the blood and remove urine and make sure that the blood has whatever it needs to give the brain a balanced experience, that balance can be changed, can be off. So if the kloyos are not doing their job, the brain gets a more experience that's more metushtash, that's not pleasant. You don't have a clear mood, you don't have a clear mind. That's why people used to fast in order to have that clear perception so that they can really delve into what it is they're thinking and they can understand themselves. So a sluggish brain somehow has to do with the kloyos, with the kidneys. So therefore, people who are spiritually in tune, they would be able to tell based on their kidney function if what they believe is properly aligned with their nature or not. So they could right away tell, as they're thinking or believing things that are not within their nature, they can feel within their consciousness that the mind is not fully calm. The mind is not the same way that it's supposed to be, and that would tell them how to shift their consciousness and their thoughts and their perceptions in order to find balance again within their being. And according to Chazal, this is how Avram Avinu found the truth, because he didn't have a Torah at the time. He learned with Shem and Aver, but Shem and Aver were not necessarily Jewish. They had a tremendous amount of wisdom that came from before the Mabul, the Chochmas B'nai Kedem. This is where we have most of our astrological wisdom from. We have astronomical wisdom. These people lived for long lifespans, and they had a much deeper understanding of what it means to be human and how life looks before there are words, before you can be manipulated by other people, but simply from the experience of life itself, what it means. So for these people, wisdom was their way of life. But Avram Avinu, who was trying to find the ultimate root of wisdom, trying to find the ultimate root of himself, basically, he used his kidneys. Chazal say, Nasir shtei kli Yosef kishnei rabbonim. His two kidneys became like two teachers. And through them, he learned everything there is to know about reality. So the kidneys, and like I said, all the body parts are involved in consciousness. There's nothing there that's just there for physical function. All the physical functions are spiritual functions. Like everything that happens to the blood will affect your perceptions. It will affect your imagination. And you can see this in the language, because the word dimyon comes from the source root of the word dam. So dam is blood, and dimyon is when blood manifests into spirit, it becomes a dimyon. And they say it's like a similar thing to al, which means above, and elyon, which means the one who is above. So the same way dam and dimyon have the same relationship. And when the mind receives blood flowing through it, it reads it and it writes in it. Right? It's influenced by it and it influences it. And then the mind has to be mavchin ben dam le dam, ben din le din, ben nega le nega, to understand what is it that is real, what is it that is fake, and what is it that is causing damage to my spiritual or physical being, and how can I heal it? And that's ultimately the wisdom that goes back to the people who actually understood the body, understood the mind. Like we see these things in Egypt, for example, how they can preserve a body for thousands of years. I don't know if today they even have the ability to do that, and today we're very advanced. However, it's a whole different type of advancement. It's an advancement that, according to the Torah, is actually driving backwards, because the physical side of reality is the easy side. You need food, you need sleep, you have some basic functions that you need to take care of, and you're fine. However, the spiritual is much more complex, and it takes much longer to actually become familiar with it, and therefore, in the olden times, when people were not so confused, they would designate their entire life to understanding the spirit. In the current life, we designate our entire life to survive, to keep our body afloat. So we have food and we have shelter. And that's completely upside down. However, technological advancement did make survival very easy in many different ways. So when the spiritual becomes alive again, it will have a very good resting place, a very good kli, where it can live. It can live in a comfortable place. But the ultimate goal, the ultimate idea of us studying Torah, and the reason why Torah is so treasured, and it is the shvachim that Chazal give to somebody who learns Torah are mamish unlimited, and that's because only through healing the spirit will we be able to realize the ancient wisdom, will we be able to realize what it is that Moshe Rabbeinu and Chazal were actually trying to impart on us. And through that, we'll be able to get closer to the final redemption, which should happen speedily within our days. So I think we're going to finish here for now. We didn't describe HaKadosh Baruch Hu yet. We only described the Shechina. However, it's very important to get the basic concepts of spirituality and what we're really talking about before we delve into more terminology, because otherwise, if a person doesn't know where we are and what we're talking about and how it relates to him here and now, so it becomes an intellectual exercise and it's not really effective. So, B'ezrat Hashem, next week, we'll try to get into Kitcha Brichi more to understand what is this unification that we're talking about, and how does that affect us, and how can we help that happen sooner? B'ezrat Hashem.
You said that kidneys, they give the advice, right? So, but some advices the body gives as a logic advice, and some advices give as sort of like gut advice, like I have a feeling that this is the right thing to do.
A feeling doesn't necessarily mean it's your kidneys. When we're talking about kidneys, we're talking about a person who can actually differentiate. It's not just a regular guy saying, oh, my gut tells me. This can be based on, she's just afraid. Your gut starts talking to you when you're afraid, really. And, somebody scares you, your stomach is going to tell you run. Doesn't mean that's the best idea.
No,